The purpose of this show is to guide you to realign with habits that get you to live the life you've always dreamed of. This is the Habit-Based Lifestyle Podcast with Jesse Ewell. This is the Habit-Based Lifestyle, where you can access your full potential right now. Finally break free from destructive habits. That dream life, if you want it, you can have it. This is where you transform your health, mind, business, and relationships. Or do nothing and keep your life the way it is. But if you're ready for change, you're in the right place. This is where you're gonna learn how to live a habit-based lifestyle. You are tuning in to the Habit-Based Lifestyle Podcast with your host, Jesse Ewell. This is the Habit-Based Lifestyle. Let's go.
Welcome back to the Habit-Based Lifestyle Podcast. I'm your host, Jesse Ewell, and today we're going to be talking about imposter syndrome. Over this last week, I had an opportunity to interview a gentleman for my Habit-Based Lifestyle Accelerator program. And one of the things that he talked about was feeling like an imposter, feeling like he had this imposter syndrome. And I wanted to talk about this today because there's a lot of entrepreneurs, both men and women, who I feel like have this imposter syndrome. I also feel like it was something that I dealt with for a long time. And I think it's very important that we, talk about why we feel like we may have this, but not only that, why we may hesitate on stepping out when we are called into a place of leadership. And so as I get into today's episode, I want you to know that this episode is going to be specifically for the man or woman who maybe is, getting ready to step out and lead, whether it be inside of, coaching, consulting, training, maybe even just starting your own business and really asking yourself, hey, am I qualified to lead? But at the same time, you're feeling this calling that you're being called forward to a leadership role. And so as we get into this today, I really want to work with you on some ways that we can, not only question ourselves, but some ways that I have worked through this so that hopefully this can help you in the future when you feel called to lead, when you feel called to start a new business, when you feel called to go in a new direction. So the standard definition of this imposter syndrome is also known as imposter phenomenon. It's fraud syndrome or an imposter experience. But this is a psychological pattern in which an individual doubts their accomplishments. So think about this for a minute. Like, how many times have you downplayed your accomplishments? I can think back for me, for much of my life, no matter how big something that I accomplished was, I had a very hard time celebrating that and just being proud of what I accomplished. And, I think there's a lot of people that really feel that way. And, I can remember, even being in high school and getting awards, but getting up in front of people and kind of being almost the center of attention, and where, I had a really hard time with that. I had a really hard time, as long as I was on the field or in the game and being celebrated, that was fine. But the minute, the game was over and it was like you were in front of a big audience or a lot of people, I got very uncomfortable. But I think a lot of people really downplay their accomplishments and they don't think it's that big of a deal. And in a sense, they kind of want to play small when it comes to that. Like I had this habit or tendency of, when I was put out in front of an audience, even when I first started doing podcasts, it was very hard for me to share things that I had accomplished. It was very hard to share, some of the talents I had. And that was something that I had to get through. But this imposter syndrome, it is all about doubting the accomplishments. Like, maybe they're not big enough. Maybe they're not as big as somebody else's. The day and age we live in with social media is people are really putting out like, hey, I changed my underwear and oh my gosh, it was amazing. And there's some people who are great at, talking about their accomplishments, as in, you know, changing their underwear was this huge accomplishment. Two, even if you watch sports today, you watch guys make like one tackle and you think that they would have scored a touchdown because of the celebration they have. And I'm not downplaying what that is. I'm just saying, accomplishments, some people are very good about celebrating themselves. And there's a lot of people, I think, especially entrepreneurs and business owners, people being called forward that really downplay the accomplishments and talents that they have. But there's also this internalized fear of being exposed as a fraud. And that's really what I want to talk about today is like the reasons why we feel like a fraud. The times I've felt like a fraud is when I've, felt called to lead in a way and I didn't feel comfortable stepping out in that. And so, I can even remember, you know, being put in situations as I started to do, more of this lifestyle coaching, being, put in a situation where it's like, okay, now you need to lead these guys. And I'm like, man, I don't feel qualified. I don't feel like, I have what it takes. And as I went through that, I realized that that was necessary for me. That was necessary for me to feel that fraud, because on the other side of the fraud was, the freedom to step out and lead. And I feel like if we don't feel what it feels like to be a fraud, we'll never feel like, what it feels like to have the freedom to lead. But I think at any level, as we grow and as our leadership grows, we're going to feel like a fraud at some point. And I really want you to think about this is like every leader that stepped out to do something they were called to do, I think at one point they're going to wrestle with this idea of like, hey, am I worthy? Am I a fraud? Am I in good standing with myself? And I can remember like thinking of like, man, am I in good standing with myself to lead people inside of like their health and fitness? And so that means that I had to start looking at how have I been showing up inside of my own fitness? And I know for me is if I'm not showing up in my own fitness, then I'm going to feel like a fraud by leading others in their own. And I could give you one specific example is, I've been in fitness since I was, 10, 11 years old. And it's always been something that's been part of my life. But as I started, doing this thing at 14 years old of chewing smokeless tobacco, as I got older, and started this and kept doing this habit, I got into my 19, 20, 21, and I'm like thinking, man, I'm a fraud. I'm sitting here telling people that they need to lose weight, they need to be healthy, they need to do all these things. But here I am, every day before work or after work, or even sometimes during work, chewing. And here I am all day preaching, like, you got to eat right, you got to do this. And yet at the same time, I'm feeling like a fraud because, hey, I'm not even taking my own medicine. I'm chewing. And I did that for, I think it was nearly 24 years. And the day that I quit, I can remember all of that fraud, all of that shame, all of that guilt just being washed away. And it was a really powerful moment, but I think in a way is it helped me learn a valuable lesson that, hey, chewing tobacco was no different than somebody else sedating on food. It was just a different mechanism, but at the same sense, it was not healthy. It was taking away something from me. And so as I've continued to lead, whether it be, men in a spiritual path, I can think of, a lot of times where, maybe we don't go to church because we feel like a fraud in our own life, or we don't want to go to church because we feel like a fraud, or we don't want to, do these things inside of our spirituality because we feel like a fraud first. But the one thing I'll say is this is when we step out in leadership, that fraud is questioned. It comes to a why in the road. And it's basically like, hey, you can still be a fraud and go to church. You can still be a fraud and do these things, but you're going to be faced with the reality of that's going to come into question at some point, and you get to challenge that story. You get to challenge that feeling of being a fraud. And I can remember leading other couples and thinking, man, who am I to lead other couples? Who am I to lead, you know, people in their own marriage when my own marriage has stuff going on in it? And then I'm like, okay, well, what about business? Who am I to lead other people in business if I make mistakes in my business? And so I think inside of leadership, we feel like a fraud because we feel like our life or a part of our life isn't perfect. And I want to remind you today that this is no leader is perfect. And if that is your standard to step out as a leader, like you're never going to step out. If that is your standard to be a perfect business owner, perfect leader, like I kind of had that story. If you're thinking about, man, like you feel like I put a lot of pressure on myself. So anytime I've ever stepped out in leadership, I'm like, hey, I have to have this solid foundation under me before I actually do that. Otherwise, I'm going to feel like a fraud, but I'll still probably feel like a fraud because I'm very hard on myself. And so as I really thought about what does it take to really step out and lead and to get rid of this imposter syndrome, what is it going to take? And as I went through this process, I really thought about, man, first of all, we have to learn as much as possible. So if I was going to be a coach, if I was going to start a business, if I was going to step out in some type of leadership role, the very first thing I'd have to do is learn about my craft, learn about coaching, learn about guiding, learn about, consulting, all of these things. Like this is literally an art. And the more that we can learn about an art, the more that we can surround ourselves with coaches, the more that we can surround ourselves with people who are better than us, we can learn, we can grow, we can be around people who maybe have made some mistakes that we haven't, but we have to constantly find ways to learn and grow. And what I really mean is like you got to be a student of the game. And I will use an example for me as like I had a really hard time in high school, and it was primarily because the subjects that we worked on, the subjects that we were taught, were not very interesting to me. But the things I was interested in, I would literally study. I would become a student of the game. I would learn everything there was to learn about that. I would surround myself with people who knew more than me so that I could speed up my learning. And as I did this, I realized that this was actually a gift that I had. I always had a tendency to find people, surround myself with people who were much better than me and learn from them. The other thing is once you've learned something, you have to begin to live it. And I believe this is one of the fundamental mistakes that we make inside of being called to do something. So many people learn something. So many people, they feel like they're growing. They feel like they have it. And then they bypass the living it and they go straight to leading it. And so they're out of integrity with themselves. They're out of alignment with themselves because they know deep down they have not lived it for a certain amount of time. And living it really is about experiencing it. It's one thing to learn it, study it, and grow in that way. But when we truly live it, we are truly experiencing and having an experience. And so living it is all about the reps that we're doing. It's all about really living inside of like practicing, inside of my program, Habit-Based Lifestyle. The reason I came up with that is because I had literally lived these habits for years, decades. And that name was really what made me feel like I was in alignment. It made me feel like I was being called to teach people how to simplify their lifestyle, how to simplify what they're doing in a day-to-day basis so that they could make it practical and understandable. But I also wanted to allow them the framework to live inside of that and experience it themselves. Living it means we got to make mistakes. Living it means we fail. It means we get back up after getting knocked down. And listen, if you haven't made mistakes in your life, you really truly haven't lived and experienced it in a full way. See, for every setback, there's a comeback. And if you're only having, if you're only making these things of like you're afraid to make a mistake, if you're afraid to fail, if you're afraid to have a setback, then we're truly missing out on the experience because, man, I've had so many failures in my life. I've made so many mistakes, but every time I made one, there was a valuable lesson that really allowed me to move forward. And there's something to say about the man in their arena who gets knocked down and gets back up. There's something to say about the man in the arena who has to, leverage resiliency inside of our life so that we can begin to move forward. And the last part of this is about leading. Listen, if you are learning something and you are living it, you eventually at some point will be called in your life. I say by God, but there will be a higher calling on your life, and it will be to lead in what you have lived and what you have learned. And the reason we'll feel pulled and called to this is because we've experienced it. We've experienced a result and we'll want to share that with someone else. And I think at a fundamental level, every one of us is called into leadership. Every one of us is called to lead someone in our life. And when we have truly learned and grown in our own experiences and lived it, there's this pull that's calling you forward. But it's going to require you to take a stand. And in taking that stand is where sometimes we'll feel like an imposter. And because of this, think about this: is anytime I take a stand in my own experience, in my own life, there's a path that opens up. And it's like, hey, you must choose this path of leadership if you truly want to grow. Here's the other thing is I know so many people that are living a life that is without purpose. They're living a life without this fulfillment. And it's because they have not taken a stand. It's because they have not answered this call of leadership. And if you truly want to grow inside of your life, if you truly want to grow inside of your own experience as a husband, father, leader, businessman, if you truly want to grow inside of your experience as a mother, wife, leader, businesswoman, whatever yours is, whether it be leading your kids or just leading someone else inside of your family. It doesn't mean you have to have millions of people in front of you, but you will never truly be fulfilled if you continue to let this imposter syndrome, make you out to be a fraud. You're going to have to step into leadership. And I truly believe that when you step into leadership, when you step into feeling like a fraud, things begin to open up in your life and you truly begin to live your purpose. And so maybe the biggest question you could ask yourself is this: why do I feel like an imposter? Why do I feel like I have this imposter syndrome? And what would it take for me to eliminate this? And 9 times out of 10, 10 times out of 10, it's about stepping into leadership. It's about crossing this bridge of going from fraud to freedom. But guess what? That requires you to take a step, to take a leap forward inside of your faith, inside of yourself, inside of your own experience, and realize that this is just part of the process of going to leadership. No one ever said leadership was going to be easy. No one ever said you were going to be a perfect leader or had to be a perfect leader. But what you have to do is choose to be a leader. And inside of that choice, you're going to have to battle the criticism of being a fraud, battle the criticism of being an imposter. But you're going to have to step through that choice and come out on the other side inside of freedom. So I want to thank you guys today. At the end of this, if you're truly leading, there's one other thing that'll happen is you're going to get criticized. You're going to get criticized once you choose to be a leader. No one is going to criticize you more than yourself. You're going to criticize yourself, how you're not ready, you're not called, but no one will criticize you more than you. But the other side of this is people will criticize you. And I want you to realize this, because this gentleman said, man, I feel like I have to be like everybody else. I feel like I have to do all these things. And I feel like people are criticizing me because I'm not exactly where I want to be. And I said, listen, man, no one's criticizing someone below them. People are always criticizing the people they feel like they're above them because they're trying to pull them back down. And so I said, listen, when the man in the arena is creating, the man in the stands is criticizing. And so the number one thing is you have to understand is you're actually in the game. You're playing in the game. It's very easy to sit on the sideline and criticize. And so as I walked him through this, I said, listen, as long as you are creating your life, someone else will be criticizing it at the same time. As long as you're creating inside of your life, someone else will always be criticizing, especially if you would continue to create throughout your life. And that has been my experience, but that just lets us know we're going in the right direction. And so don't be afraid of criticism. Don't be afraid of this imposter syndrome. This is an opportunity for you to step into this today and step into your own leadership and ultimately create the life and the lifestyle that you ultimately want. So I want to thank you guys for being on the podcast today. I love sharing this message with you. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me, jesse@habitbasedlifestyle.com. If you want to be part of our private Facebook group committed to business owners taking their lifestyle and business to the next level, it's called Habit-Based Lifestyle Secrets. I'd love to have you in there. The link is in the show notes. And until next episode, have a great day.
The purpose of this show is to guide you to realign with habits that get you to live the life you've always dreamed of. This is the Habit-Based Lifestyle Podcast with Jesse.